Getting to come back today when we were studying last time, and so I rushed through the Book of Ruth. And if you weren't here, we'll review a little bit of that. And if you were, I hope you won't find this review tedious, because I'm trying not to make it tedious. Okay, so let's turn to the Book of Ruth. And by way of review, what I rushed through because I wanted to tie points together is the perspective that we see. The perspective that we learn by a study of the Book of Ruth. And would somebody care to sum that up for me? A limited perspective and then a broader perspective that we see in the Book of Ruth. You remember from last time. So most immediately, what did we see if we were looking at things from just Naomi's perspective? Most immediately, what kind of perspective did she have here at the beginning of the Book of Ruth? What did things look like from her perspective?
She had just lost family.
Yeah, very personal. She just lost family. She couldn't see any good out of it. And can we blame her, right? So that's where we see in chapter 1, we see her perspective is God's against her. He's convicted her in some way. He's afflicted her, verse 21 says. And one point I wanted to make, given that perspective, not very much later in her life, here at the end of chapter 2, we see a switch, even given her narrow perspective, what she could see and understand. Because we see Ruth has a good day of gleaning, meets Boaz, there's some promise there. And in verse 20, it says, Then Naomi said to her daughter, this is Ruth 2, verse 20. Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, Blessed be he of the Lord who has not forsaken his kindness to the living and the dead. And Naomi said to her, This man is a relation of ours, one of our close relatives. Ruth the Moabitess said, He also said to me, You shall stay close by my young men until they have finished all my harvest. And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, It is good, my daughter, that you should go out with those young women, and that people do not meet you in another field. So she stayed close by the young women of Boaz and gleaned until the end of barley harvest. Okay, so you go back and verse 20, Blessed be he in the Lord. She sees how things are turning around in a limited way. This doesn't make up in her mind for the things that have happened to her. Good morning. This doesn't make up in her mind for the things that have happened to her. But what this does is it shows her a positive light. There's light at the end of the tunnel, some type of hope that's coming, and from her very small perspective. And so where we're picking up, I didn't know I was going to be able to teach more Ruth, so we're reviewing what we talked about last week, and we rushed, and we'll be being able to take a little more time in chapters 2 and 3 especially. So there's her smaller perspective. Now what is the much larger perspective that we can look back now 3,000 years removed, and we can see that she may have never known. From our perspective, what do we see? Came out of her loss.
This is all part of God's plan.
Okay. Jesus was to come through this lineage that would happen through Ruth and Boaz. This fit into God's plan of bringing the Savior to the earth. Now, I'm real careful to say that Naomi may have never known that. I say that because we don't see all this revealed, and we don't see her at the end of her life, and we don't know what someone knows exactly after this life is over. But we don't see any clue that she had a hint of it while she was living. Similarly, we brought up Job and suffering last time. We don't see that Job has any clue of why he's suffering. He's just suffering. And then when God comes and answers him, he doesn't tell him why he's suffering. He basically, if we could sum up those chapters when God's talking to Job, is he basically establishes to Job that Job didn't know what he was talking about, and that God had things under control, and to trust in God. That's as far as we see Job know. Then we look in the book of James for us, and we see in James chapter 5 where Job is brought up as an example for what? patience. Patience. Here we are, thousands of years removed from Job. And we're trying to live faithfully in Christ. And we suffer illness, and we suffer loss, and we suffer mistreatment for trying to do the right thing. And we can look back at the book of Job, and we can gather patience and strength from it, and be encouraged to go on to live for eternity. Job's life and his struggles affect our eternity. Do you get that connection? It encourages us to be more faithful. Job never could have seen that. He saw his loss, and he saw his struggles, and he saw his suffering. And don't try to tell Job when you're sitting there with his friends, well, it's going to be worth it someday. Don't try to do that. That's a perspective that's difficult, if not impossible, to grasp entirely. But you can tell Job, I'm so sorry. So sorry this happened. And let's just draw closer to God. It doesn't mean it's all going to get better, but you aren't going to get better going farther from God. And what we see with Job and what we see with Naomi is they remained faithful, even when they didn't get it. Even when they were upset and hurt and wondering why God would do that. We're going to say something.
So they kept the faith in God, even though they didn't really understand why this was happening to them. But they did keep the faith in God through their lives.
Yeah, so we see faithful people in Scripture say why. We see them say, how long? I don't get it. But they're faithful because they don't say, why, well, never mind, and leave. They don't say, I don't get it, I quit. They say, why? I don't get it, but there's no better place to go. And that makes me think a lot of Peter in John 6, right? Whenever Jesus had that difficult saying, and the people turned away, and Jesus asked Peter, will you go also? And what did Peter say? Where else shall we go? There's nowhere else to go. It might seem like there's going to be an easier way, but there's no other way that leads to life. But where else shall we go? Only you have the words of eternal life. And while we don't see that direct connection to Ruth, Naomi stays faithful to God, and then we end up seeing her as part of Jesus' lineage. You look at Matthew 1, and typically you expect to see men in a Hebrew lineage. That's just, culturally, that's what they did. And so when you see a woman in a Hebrew lineage, why? Why would a woman be put in a Hebrew lineage? That's just a good question to ask. At first, isn't it? You say, well, why is that name there? Let's go ahead to Matthew while we're talking about that. And then we'll get back into Ruth, because this is tying together that, and by way of review and a point that I didn't get to make because we were rushing last time. So Matthew 1, we'll go right ahead to verse 3, where Jesus' lineage, Judah begot Perez and Zerah by Tamar. There's a woman in the lineage. Anything odd about that account? Anything noteworthy of Tamar in the lineage of Jesus? It was Tamar, Judah's wife. No, Tamar was Judah's daughter-in-law. That's notable. Not saying it's good, it's notable, it's different. And what we find then is, if you want to say there are knots, in a sense, knots in Jesus' family tree. Everybody isn't just a wonderful person, only great, outstanding people of faith in Jesus' family tree. Here you have Judah and Tamar. We keep on looking. And Hezron begot Ram, Ram begot Amminadab, Amminadab begot Nahshon, Nahshon begot Salmon, Salmon begot Boaz by Rahab. Anything notable about Rahab? She was a harlot and a Gentile. Wow, okay. Boaz begot Obed by Ruth. She was a Moabitess. And when we see the women's names, we see that there's something notable about them being part of the lineage. They were people that history, again, would have written off as disgraces. History would have written off as unimportant. History would have written off as not really historical. But here we see them preserved in Jesus' lineage. Why would God use people like that? And having used people like that, why would He record it for us to read here in 2022?
We could change. You might not always be what we were at one time. You can change to be better and God can use you.
Excellent point. Thank you. She said, you can change. God can change you, make you better than what you were. You won't always be what you were at one point, and He can use you. What's her name? I'm sorry.
Rose.
Miss Rose. Thank you, Miss Rose. And what we see is these people aren't identified by their past, whatever it might have been. They're identified by their lineage in Christ. And ultimately, in the judgment, that's what's going to identify us. Are we in Jesus' family? Are we a faithful part of His family? Not what our past was, not where we came from, but where we ended up in Christ. And that's all that's going to be that matters. And that's one thing that we can learn about that. Along with how amazing it is what God worked out through the history of the world to bring a son into the world. And so go ahead back. And so each of those women, each of those people in the lineage is a good study, but each of those women is an interesting study whenever we look at Jesus' lineage. But come on back to Ruth, and I wanted to focus today, so we looked at the big picture. We can be Christians today. We can be found in Christ in part because of Ruth and Naomi. And even the suffering that they had to go through was part of that. And that's recorded here so that we can see it. I wanted to focus a little more today on this idea of character. Character and relationships. And because I'm a man, I'll be speaking to the men specifically. We can all learn about this, but about relationships and about ways to treat women that we learn about subtly here in this book. And ladies, you can be honest and tell me what you think as we're examining these things. But I want to go back to where Boaz is talking to Ruth because he's impressed with her. And why was he impressed with Ruth? Yeah, Miss Rose said her work and care for her mother-in-law. It had been reported to him that she came back with her mother-in-law, with Naomi, and was caring for her. And she was a hard worker all day, and the servant, he's giving an exhaustive report. We don't see it all, but I'm saying exhaustive because of this. She's been working all day, except she did pause a little bit for a break. I mean, that's a pretty specific report that's alluded to there. And we go up into the middle of the chapter, in verse 12, he said, "The Lord repay your work, and full reward be given you by the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge." So she told Naomi, "I want your God to be my God." Boaz is saying, "You've come under the wings of God to be your refuge." That sounds reminiscent of what Jesus is going to say in the future, that he wished to gather the children of Israel under his wings. That's what we see a protective hen do, right? Not a Hindu, but a hen who is protecting her chicks, brings them under her wings. And verse 13, "Then she said, 'Let me find a favor in your sight, my Lord, for you have comforted me, and have spoken comfort to me, and have spoken kindly to your maidservant, though I am not like one of your maidservants.'" She recognized she was different. Again, like we talked about the Samaritan woman in John 4, she says, "Why are you, a Jew, talking to me, a Samaritan woman?" She knew that was strange. Well, Ruth recognizes culturally, Boaz didn't owe her anything. He didn't have to talk to her about anything. All he had to do abide by the law was what? To abide by the Jewish law. What did Boaz have to do? We're talking about the law of gleaning. What did Boaz have to do? Yeah, so they're in the barley harvest, and they just had to, I'll put it as roughly as possible. All Boaz had to do was leave Ruth as leftovers. That's all he was required of by law. What he's doing, I wanted to make a point, is far above and beyond what he's required to do by the law. And in fact, as you read, what you find is the Jews had so twisted this, and maybe started at this time, but by the time Jesus was around, the Jews had started saying, okay, if you drop too much, you can go ahead and pick that up. I mean, gleanings, we don't want to leave too much for people. And so they started counting stalks of things and said, okay, if it's 2 stalks, you might need to leave that. But 3 stalks, that's not gleaning. And in fact, you might even get onto somebody going through your field and say, hold on a second, what are you doing picking through those 3 stalks? Because that's too big for gleaning. So that's what the Jews had sort of taken and done with it. God never intended for that. He intended for generosity and faith in Him. And that if you left something, you left it, and you hope that the poor would benefit from it. But Boaz is going above just saying, we're going to leave something for the poor to pick through. And he's saying, he's giving her more. And so, go to verse 14, or Ruth 2, 14. And she's recognized the goodness that he's giving. But now Boaz said to her at mealtime, come here and eat of bread and dip your piece of bread in the vinegar. Again, all he had to do is leave her leftovers. And now he's inviting her to a meal that he's providing for himself and the servants. And now somebody, if you don't like vinegar, you might say, well, that doesn't seem like a favor to me. But this is a real common thing. They still eat it today. You go in the Middle East and they'll dip their bread in the vinegar or vinegar mix. And it's something they still do around harvest time. Because guess what they probably made this bread out of? What they were harvesting. So it all goes together, and he's providing a meal for her. Now, ladies, when we're looking at things that ladies need, and ladies want that make you feel good, what does this fulfill for you? If a man not only allows you to take care of yourself and make sure that you're provided with what you need beyond that, and then feeds you more than he'd be required to do. What kind of things is that communicating to you? What feelings is it giving you? Okay, so you're not going to have to worry about being hungry, and so if you're not going to have to worry about being hungry, it's giving you a sense of what? Security. Okay, I said ladies. Sorry, Kenny, you go ahead too. Okay. I thought you had a thought. No, I'm sorry. See, this is like an auction house. If you raise your hand or scratch your nose or something, I'm not calling you. So, okay. So security. As you look at, and I'm not a psychologist, but as you look at relationship books and things like that, if you were to poll on average, women place security very high in things that they need in order to feel loved and in just a good mental space. There are people who are in a relationship and they don't feel secure about their home or their finances, and their spouse might love them, but they have a difficult time. Bless you. They have a difficult time feeling an attraction, feeling an intimacy whenever there's not security, because they're waiting for something bad to happen. And as we look at the way we're wired and the things that we need, security is one of those things especially strong for women. I wanted to look at this very quickly blooming romance. I'm going to call it that, between Ruth and Boaz, because he's going to check all the boxes, guys. If we want to know how to grow some romance in our relationships, Boaz is going to do a good job of becoming very attractive to Ruth as we're looking at this. So look at what he does. So he invites her to dinner. Verse 15. And when she rose up to glean, Boaz commanded his young men, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not reproach her. What's that mean, to glean among the sheaves? So we talked about gleaning a little more detail last week, and gleaning was picking up what was left over, corners of the field, whatever someone might drop who is reaping. What's gleaning among the sheaves? Yeah, she could go with the main group of reapers, and so she's really not gleaning anymore. What's she doing? She's harvesting. She's reaping. Now, I just want to take a moment and make a spiritual parallel here. Isn't that illustrative of what Jesus does to us in our spiritual lives. We have every spiritual blessing in Christ. Jesus doesn't expect us to eke through our lives just barely getting by. And I'm not talking about physical wealth and well-being. I'm talking about when we understand the spiritual blessings we're given. We're reaping among the sheaves. We're not just gleaning. Jesus has given us plenty more and abundantly more than we need. And it's what's the word? I'm looking. I lost the word. Sorry. As we look at the characteristics of a faithful person of God, it should be characteristic of us attempting to give that kind of blessing to others, not materially necessarily, but by whatever means we can, giving them more than what they'd expect to be given. Because, well, out of what motivation might we give someone more than what they'd expect to be given? Yeah, because we like them, we love them, we want the best for them, and in a world, in a time when we're trying to teach people about Christ, we do want to impress them. We want to have some type of influence upon them where they say, however this person is, whatever this person is, I want more of it. And rewinding now, is it possible that Naomi had that kind of influence on Ruth? And that's why when she left, Ruth said, wherever you go, I want to go. Whatever you do, I want to do. She didn't know what she was signing up for. Does that make sense? She just knew that how Naomi was, she wanted to be with her. Do you think we can do that to people around us? And one way is by giving them more than they think that we might. And again, that doesn't mean materially necessarily. That means our time, our attention, our care, our concern. And Boaz, we mentioned this last week, in very short order, Boaz showed Ruth that he was different, and he was treating her differently. To use that parallel in John 4 again, in a very quick way, Jesus showed the Samaritan woman that he was treating her differently. And we live in a world that has so much coldness and unkindness and darkness that's shown so quickly. We can, if we watch it, we can show people very quickly that we're different and that we'll treat them differently. And since I've emphasized that point, I'll go ahead and ask, what's a time today, what's a way today that in just relatively a few moments we might impress someone? Not that we're showing off, but we're wanting to open opportunity and show that we're different. That we might impress upon someone that we're different. Just through some everyday actions that we don't, it won't cost us anything. It won't, but what are some things? What was that?
Hold the door for somebody.
Hold the door. Just show genuine respect, right? Maybe smile at somebody. Wave. We're going to go and eat sometime this afternoon, I imagine. And if you're not eating at home, then you're going to be eating out. There was an article that I read by a waitress, and it said that her least favorite day of the week was, want to guess it? Sunday. That is awful. That shouldn't be the case. Her least favorite day of the week was Sunday, not because she was busy, but because of the Christians. I'll do big quotes. Because surely it's no one in the Lord's church. No. There's just other people who call themselves Christians. But she said they come in, and if they do seem nice, they're trying to look for how they can get something cheaper on their ticket. They complain. They're some of the rudest people that they encounter all week long. And they're unforgiving if something goes wrong in this busy time. They're impatient, and that should not be the case. So be the different person that when they bring your plate out and it's not what you ordered, well, you can get what you ordered, but how are you going to say it? How are you going to go about it? And I'll just tell you a personal family practice. This isn't patting myself on the back or anything, but me trying to live this. Because I've been hangry before, okay? I'm trying to do better. But the kids are really the only ones I'll send the food back for. Because I'll eat anything. If they give me the wrong thing that nobody needs to really know about it, I'll eat it. If the kids the wrong thing, the kids aren't going to eat it. So So I have to politely ask them to bring something else out. And that's sort of the line that I draw for myself. I'm real careful about how I say it. And I've worked fast food before, so I might even say something like, "Oh, that's so easy to do. That's such an easy mistake. We wanted this without this," or whatever. We don't have to say, every time we're here, they put this on here. Or this steak is medium rare, not medium well. And you're gonna, you get what I'm saying? And be that person where the waiter or waitress goes, "Wow, if they come back in here, I want to come back and get their table." And then when you say, "Hey, we have a VBS coming up," they don't go, "Well, I know to stay away from that place if they have VBS." Right? It doesn't take much. It doesn't even often take money and much effort to be able to show somebody more. But here we see Boaz show uncommon kindness and courtesy, and it makes an impression upon her, and it's going to change both of their lives. We continue on through the rest of this. We talked about how Ruth comes back to Naomi, tells her what happened. Oh, Boaz, she had reaped, by the way. I wanted to look at this back in verse 17. "So she gleaned in the field until the evening and beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley." This would have been about 22 pounds of barley. So 7 gallons, I think, is a guess that people make. And that's the remaining grain from the stalks. So she put in a big day of work. And 22 pounds of barley, it's going to take a couple of days for her and her mother-in-law to eat that. That's going to be pretty good for them. But she reaped well, and we'll keep the barley amount in mind, the ephah. And verse 23, after Naomi says, "You keep on working with it. You stick right in there." "So she stayed close by the young women of Boaz to glean until the end of barley harvest and wheat harvest, and she dwelt with her mother-in-law." I said last week, into chapter 1, we see it was barley harvest. That's a detail we might just read right over, but that gives us a date, because barley harvest is the same time today as it was then, about March. And then whenever we look here, it says until the wheat harvest, and the wheat harvest would have been through April. And what we're talking about then is about 60 days, 2 months, of her regularly being out there, of Boaz regularly given what looks like his custom, coming in, checking on the servants, getting a report, and he's seeing her, and she's seeing him, and they're overall, for every account that we can see, they're people of character, and they're putting their best foot forward all the time. And in verse 1 of chapter 3, "Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, 'My daughter, shall I not seek security for you, that it may be well with you?'" Do you think Naomi knew what women need? That she didn't want her daughter-in-law to be wondering if she was going to be able to have a meal next month, if she was going to have a roof over her head, if something had happened to Naomi, where was she going to live? At this point, if Naomi died, what's that leave Ruth? Nothing. And nothing. No land. She's living with Naomi based on the inheritance that Naomi has because of Ahimelech right now. No land. I said not Ahimelech. I'm sorry. I just bumped the name right out of my head, and I'm wrong. Let me go back. Elimelech. There we go. I replaced the L and H. Okay. And so Ruth would have been left with nothing had Naomi died now. So Naomi is seeking a future security for her. That idea of security has wrapped in this word, the Hebrew word, the idea of peace and a home. And isn't that neat? Isn't that what we associate with being secure? Things are peaceful. You've got a home, a promise of a future. And in verse 2 it says, "Now Boaz, whose young women you were with, is he not our relative?" We talked about this, the near of kin. He's our near of kin. In fact, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Well, I thought this went through the wheat harvest. Well, they have their barley, heaps and heaps of barley, and they're winnowing it, processing it as they're reaping the wheat, quite possibly. What's winnowing? Has anybody ever winnowed it? Go ahead.
You did to separate the husks from the seed, or the fruit on the inside.
separating the husk from the seed. About the closest thing I've ever done to winnowing is eating a peanut out of a shell. Okay, you get the peanut out of there, and it has that little film on it, and you might just sort of do that or flake it. If you're going to eat a little bit of your of wheat yourself, you might get wheat or oats of some kind in your hand. And this is what Jesus' disciples were doing when they were walking with him in the field. They would have grabbed the heads of the grain off, and you've done this and like that, get the chaff off, and then you eat the grain. And incidentally, then you're allowed to glean and eat any time. The Pharisees who were accusing them of breaking Sabbath law were saying, you guys are winnowing and grinding this food, you're working on the Sabbath. That's how ridiculous they got. But anyway, back up to this. It was a big event, and there was somewhat of a celebration to it too, because they had a harvest, right? And Naomi, knowing what's going on, is explaining to her what to do. In verse 3, therefore wash yourself and anoint yourself, put on your best garment, and go down to the threshing floor. In her own words, what's Naomi telling her to do?
Go look for a man.
Yeah, go look for a man. Pretty yourself up. You know, look nice. And so is there anything wrong with wanting to look nice, to look your best? There's nothing wrong with wanting to look your best. And I'm being careful as we're going through here to draw these lines, because there's a strange cultural thing that's about to happen that we don't understand. And because we don't understand it, people have read all kinds of crazy things into it. But what we've seen in Ruth, again, is she's had this integrity. She's a hard worker. She's caring for her mother-in-law. So there's nothing we should read into here that would say otherwise. And so she's not dressing in a way that would be unbecoming of a woman seeking a godly man. But she is cleaning herself up, smelling nice, looking nice is the idea. And as it goes on, she says, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. Verse 4, then it shall be when he lies down that you shall notice the place where he lies, and you shall go in, uncover his feet, and lie down, and he will tell you what you should do. And this is where we get to this. This is pretty strange, isn't it? This is not normal behavior for us today, at least. And so what has happened is people have interpreted this passage so many different ways, and oftentimes they've tried to put Ruth in a position where she is really trying to commit fornication with this man, trying to lure him in to a trap, to sort of take him. Does that make sense? And
In our day and time, I believe we do.
okay, in our day and time, that's a great point, Ms. Rose. In our day and time, it's easy for us to think of that, because fornication's rampant. Everybody just, that's the first place, and sadly many quote-unquote Bible scholars read in sexuality and fornication into so much. But let's look at these two people, not as just normal people of the world, but of two people who have exhibited outstanding character and want to do things the right way. And we're going to see it differently. And we're also going to see it's more consistent with what goes on in the rest of the chapter. Because I hit this a little bit, but still it's my favorite how realistic this is. Verse 5, Ruth told Naomi, all that you say to me I will do. Verse 6, so she went down to the threshing floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law instructed her. And after Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain, and she came softly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. Now it happened at midnight that the man was startled and turned himself, and there was a woman lying at his feet. Yes, that about sums it up, doesn't it? You'd be startled at that. I just think that's a funny little detail. And also, I don't read into this that Boaz had a drunken feast. They had celebrated a harvest, and he was full. We've experienced that. You're hungry, and then you eat, and you're cheerful, right? He was full, and he goes to sleep. She had uncovered his feet. So if we picture this as quite literally what it would have looked like, he would have been lying down. Let's picture him lying down like this. This is him. And what would he have covered himself with customarily? We would have covered ourselves with our blankets, right? What would he have covered himself with? His cloak, his outer garment. Your outer garment was given to you as a covering. And your poor, that's all they had. But here he was likely just covered with his cloak, his outer garment. And so she would have crept in the dark and uncovered his feet and laid down sort of like they're an upside down T, like this, okay? If someone's down at your feet, what are they saying about where they're placing themselves in a figure? They're in subjection. It's a pretty lowly thing to be at somebody's feet, especially they've been on a threshing floor all night. Now, it was customary for them to wash their feet when they ate because their feet would have been so dirty. But he's walking around this threshing floor, he eats, he goes and he lies down, and she's lying down, and I'm not trying to say this to be crude or anything, just to show she's lying down at his dirty feet. And look at what she says after he wakes up in verse 9. And he said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I'm Ruth." Why did he say, "Who are you"? Really simple, practical thing here. It's dark. That's why she had to watch where he was going to lay down, because there were going to be other bodies there on the floor lying down after the harvest. This isn't in the privacy of his bedchambers or anything like that. They were threshing, they ate, they lay down. He was lying there at the bottom of the heap of wheat, basically, of barley. And so she tells him, "I'm Ruth, your maidservant. Take your maidservant under your wing, for you are a close relative." Lots packed into this. I'm going to do this real quickly. You remember Abigail, the wife of Nabal, that Nabal wouldn't feed David and his men. Abigail saved her husband and his men from death from David's army. And then Nabal died, and Abigail became David's wife. Whenever David said, "Marry me," Abigail said, "Who am I? I'm not worthy to wash the feet of your servants, to be a servant to wash the feet of your servants." Two different words for servants there. Abigail was saying, I'm not worthy to be a servant of your servants, the lowest servant there is. Whenever the plague struck Egypt, it killed all the firstborn from Pharaoh's house all the way to the servants to the animals. That word servants, right above animals, is that lowest word for servants. And here you have Ruth, and that's what she uses for herself. She says, "I am the lowest of servants." I think she's trying to make a point, and she says, "Take me under your wing." Does that make you think of anything we've read recently? Chapter 2. Boaz says, you've come under God's wing for refuge and protection, shelter, care, nurture. She says, "You take me under your wing." This word wing can also be translated garment, the hem of your garment. And so she's under his feet, laid down. She doesn't seem to be covered with a covering. And she's saying, "Cover me with the corner of your garment. Cover me with your wing. And take me then into your household. Give me shelter. Give me protection." All those things implied in that. He's a close relative. You are a close relative. Verse 10. Then he said, "Blessed are you of the Lord, my daughter, for you have shown more kindness." Now, right out of his mouth, "Blessed are you of the Lord." Does that sound like somebody who just has fornication and worldly desires in his mind, and that's what's going on here? Not at all. And he says, "You've not considered, you've shown kindness at the end, more at the end than at the beginning, that you do not go after the young man, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you request, for all the people of my town know that you are a virtuous woman." There we go. Boom. Right off the bat. A woman of virtue doesn't try to seduce a man to get what she wants. That's not what was going on here. She was showing her humility and giving a humble request to be cared for by him in a way that was allowable by law. Now, it is true that I am a close relative. However, there's a relative closer than I. Verse 12, another thing showing Boaz's integrity. He could have just said, "Okay, let's sneak this in. I'll just take you as nearest of kin." He said, "There's somebody else I've got to check with." Verse 13, "Stay this night, and in the morning it shall be that If he will perform the duty of close relative for you, good. Let him do it. But if he does not want to perform the duty to you, then I will perform the duty for you. As the Lord lives, lie down until morning. So she lay at his feet until morning, and she arose before anyone could recognize her. Then he said, do not let it be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. And so he's probably telling the servants there, because they would have recognized that. Also he said, bring the shawl that is on you and hold it. This is just a fun thing. If you have a different thing in your translation, I want you to tell me here. And when she held it, he measured 6 ephahs of barley. Does your translation say something different? Everybody has 6 ephahs of barley? Okay. And you'll see in a second why. And laid it on her, then she went into the city. How much earlier did I say an ephah weighed? 20 to 22 pounds. So he measured out 112 pounds of barley and laid it on her. And have a good day, go home. Anybody see any problems with that? Yeah, she was a stout woman. Now, there are women who carry lots of water even today on their heads, on their shoulders, and things like that. It's more likely, do you see anything about the word ephah is different in your verse? Depends on who your printer is, but it might be italicized. And so I wanted to bring this up out of just a general Bible study note. If you see an italicized word in your translation, what does that mean? It means the translators provided the word to try to help smooth it out. That word's not in there. He measured out 6, and the translator said, ephahs. 6 22-pound increments, or he measured out 6 measures of something. So cups. It could have been any number there. And I bring this up because some people say, oh, that's ridiculous, putting 100 pounds on this woman. It's not if you look at what some women even right now are carrying around. But at the same rate, it could have just as much been, to use our measurements, he measured out 6 cups. Because he's going to see her soon. He's not trying to get her food until the next year. And so, wrapping this up, because I believe that's the end of my time, right? About 15 till. He gives her things, shows her that he cares. And this is the, I guess, a romantic thing that I wanted to end on, and encouraging us in verse 18. Then she said, so when Ruth went home and told Naomi what was going on, Naomi said, sit still, my daughter, until you know how the matter will turn out. For the man will not rest until he has concluded the matter this day. Ladies, how does it make you feel if your man won't rest until he takes care of you? Right? That's sort of something pretty big that you're looking for. Men, we need to be that kind of man. But also looking at the bigger scheme of things, he was going to go do the will of God, and we should have an attitude and a character like Boaz that somebody says he's not going to rest until he does the right thing. But thank you all very much for a good class.